There's a place in Ohio where the earth hums. For decades, residents felt it in their bones, but nobody knew what it was. Then one day, a scientist drove through town and picked up a weird radio signal. He followed it right to the cornfield behind a farmhouse. There, he discovered a massive underground cavity humming at 49 hertz. Whatever was happening down there was so powerful, it was changing the way the earth vibrated. He called his discovery the hum in the home, and it wasn't until 3 decades later that we figured out what it really was. The US government was using the cavity to secretly test rocket engines. What does this have to do with the story you're about to hear? Well, you'll find out soon. Let me get straight to the point. This story is about the phantom who stalked through America in the early 2000s, killing perfectly healthy people and leaving them as accidents. And the most frustrating part is that we might actually know who this phantom is. We have a name, possibly even a face, but we can't seem to put any of it together. So if you want to hear this story, it's important to understand that this is going to be frustrating. You're going to have questions, you're going to want answers. And the only answer I can give you is the question itself, because that is what makes this mystery so spooky. It's the fact that the answers seem to be sitting right in front of us. In 2008, mathematician Dr. Lena Foss looked at publicly available data on accidental deaths and spotted something unusual. There was nothing unusual about the victims themselves. 15 seemingly random Americans with no connection to each other, scattered across 5 different states. But when Dr. Foss studied their deaths, she saw that the patterns were too neat to be a coincidence. Each death had a little quirk to it, something that tipped the scales of fate and tipped them into an early grave. For example, Takia Honda thought she'd just pulled something in her neck and parked her car on the street to stretch it out in the fresh air. Little did she know that the cable holding her car on the hill had been meticulously cut. And while she was distracted, her car rolled away and down a steep hill, eventually smashing into a tree. Or how about Paul Allen Shoemaker, who was waiting to cross the street when a taxi suddenly slammed into him? When investigators looked at the scene, they saw that the taxi had a history of mechanical issues, and the brake line had been expertly severed. These stories go on, and at first they seem completely disconnected. But when Dr. Foss ran them through her computer, she saw something strange. Almost every single death had something in common. For their death, each victim had made a tiny change to their daily routine. Something that threw off the dominoes, like taking a different bus or arriving at work a few minutes late. Each death was carefully orchestrated, the result of some dark plan cooked up in a mastermind's mind. Now, normally you'd think that a story like this would be easy to solve. After all, we live in the age of big data. We have technology on our side. But trust me, this isn't the kind of data that's easy to handle. Let me explain. Let's say you wanted to track where all your friends were going on a Friday night. If you asked each one of them individually, you'd end up with a nice list of addresses. You'd know where they all went. But now imagine that you're trying to track the movements of thousands of people. Asking them one by one isn't feasible. Instead, you'd have to rely on mass surveillance, tracking their phones, watching their social media, and piecing together a picture of their behavior that way. Now imagine that you're not trying to track a bunch of teenagers on a Friday night. You're trying to track hundreds of thousands of people across an entire country. All their actions, choices, hobbies, purchases, and connections become data points in a massive web that could predict their behavior. But here's the twist. Some of those people are dead. Their movements have been wiped out, leaving gaps in the data that turn a clear picture into a jigsaw puzzle. The pieces are still there, but they've been scrambled, so you'll have to look at the tiniest details, the changes in heartbeats, the flickering of security cameras, and try to connect the dots that way. That's why this investigation has taken so long. When Dr. Foss brought her findings to the press, a team of veteran journalists jumped on the case. Reporter Maya Ortiz dove into the records of each death, looking for clues that the police might have missed. She found subtle signs that someone had tampered with each crime scene, making the accidents look just right. Power panels tripped without leaving burn marks. Guardrails were shaved down just enough to pass inspection, but not enough to withstand the victim's weight. A carbon monoxide detector had its battery installed upside down, making it impossible to trigger. Someone had anticipated the tools and forensic procedures that would arrive on the scene and gamed the system accordingly. This was no coincidence. It was cold, methodical, almost surgical. Now, one of the scariest parts of this story is that we might actually have a pretty good idea of who was responsible for all of this. See, as Maya dug deeper, she found something remarkable. All of the victims seemed to have something in common. Before their untimely demise, they had all altered their routines in small but significant ways. New routes, new appliances, different parking levels, and that's when everything started to click into place. So, this wasn't just a string of unfortunate accidents. It was a hunting ground. Each victim had wandered into the path of a predator who had been waiting for them. At this point, you're probably wondering, wait, didn't these people die in accidents? What does hunting have to do with anything? Well, think of it this way. Imagine that you're an experienced hunter. You know the woods like the back of your hand? Every rustle, every snap tells you something about your surroundings. Now, imagine that you hear a twig snap in the distance. As a hunter, you wouldn't just freeze and hope that whatever made the noise comes to you. You'd analyze the sound, identify the creature, and decide whether it was worth pursuing. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And that's exactly what's happening here. The victims aren't the targets. They're the creatures being tracked. And the hunter isn't looking for a fight. They're looking for the perfect moment to strike. They're waiting for an opportunity, a moment when their target deviates from their routine. Just enough to tip the scales in their favor. And when they get it, they strike fast and decisively, turning a routine trip into a deadly trap. But who is this master strategist? And why do they kill these unsuspecting people? Well, believe it or not, we might actually have an answer to that too. Among the mountains of data that Maya sifted through, she found something strange. An archive forum post from 2012, the username was Occam_IX, and the topic was risk engineering. Now, that sounds complex, but it's basically the art of identifying potential threats before they become disasters. The post was filled with insights that were technical, cold, and strangely clinical. It was like nothing else online. Then came the punchline, the phrase that turned a technical discussion into a chilling prediction. Safety systems fail not at the point of weakness, but at the hinge of assumption. To achieve failure, aim at the hinge. It's a terrifying statement, especially when you realize that every single victim had somehow interacted with one of these hinges in their life. Now, you might be wondering what this phrase means and why it's so scary. Well, let me explain. Imagine that you're designing a bridge. You want it to be strong, durable, able to withstand all kinds of weather, so you design it with a certain margin of safety. You assume that the worst possible scenario won't happen, but just in case it does, you add extra support to the structure. In this case, the extra support is the hinge. It's a small, seemingly insignificant detail that can make the difference between success and failure. But here's the thing. When you start to investigate the scene of a crime, you do the same thing. You assume that a window wouldn't fall out of its frame unless the frame was broken. You assume that a guardrail wouldn't collapse unless it had been weakened. And if you find yourself thinking along those lines, you're falling for the same assumptions that the killer is exploiting. You're aiming for the hinges. But there's a bigger question here. Who is this Occam_IX, and why should you care? Well, remember that post? I mentioned that it was like nothing else online. Well, that's not entirely true. As Maya dug deeper, she found more posts from this mysterious user. Each one was more technical, more detailed, more terrifying than the last. And each one was like a piece of a puzzle slowly coming together to form a terrifying picture. Through these posts, Maya got a glimpse into the mind of a genius. A genius who understood risk, who thrived on complexity, and saw the world in equations. This wasn't just a random person. This was a professional, an expert. And as Maya delved further into the rabbit hole, she realized that she wasn't just chasing a ghost. She was chasing a specter, the specter of brilliance. A reminder that intelligence isn't just about IQ, it's about how you use it. It's about what you do with it. And in this case, it was being used to snuff out lives in the most meticulous, terrifying way imaginable. As Maya chased Occam_Ix's digital breadcrumbs, she uncovered a trail that led to a private consulting firm called Asterion Dynamics. More specifically, to a department called the Failure Mitigation Lab. Now, the name might sound benign, but what goes on in such a lab isn't exactly sunshine and rainbows. Here's what happens. Companies spend billions of dollars designing products, and the last thing they want is for those products to fail. Enter the Failure Mitigation Lab. They help companies find weaknesses in their designs, simulate extreme conditions, and identify potential risks before they turn into disasters. It's like testing a bridge before it's built. But instead of bridges, these labs deal with everything from medical equipment to airplanes. Now, not all failure mitigation labs are created equal. Some are good, some are better. Asterian's lab was supposedly one of the best. Its director, a brilliant but abrasive engineer simply referred to as the Auditor, was a legend in the field. And it was here that Occam_IX sharpened their skills, learning how to identify weak spots, exploit vulnerabilities, and orchestrate failures with chilling precision. Now you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with dead bodies? Well, let me tell you a story. Imagine you're the CEO of a major corporation. You're under pressure to make your product safer, but you don't want to waste time and money on unnecessary precautions. That's where consultants like Asterion come in. They offer their services to help you identify real threats and filter out the noise. But here's the thing. Sometimes they might be a little too eager to help. They might be willing to push the limits a little too far, to simulate a failure a little too realistically. And in the wrong hands, this kind of expertise becomes a